Story 1. The toilet paper debacle. One very silly person ordered so much that he had nowhere to put it, and no one wanted to buy from him on the black market either. Story 2. People stockpiling items in bulk results in others lacking essential products. This experience taught me that individuals prioritize their own interests during a crisis. Story 3. Right around Thanksgiving, my mother contracted COVID-19. While still in quarantine, she insisted that my family include her in our Thanksgiving plans because it was a holiday and she didn't have anyone else to spend it with. I told her I wouldn't knowingly expose myself or my children, and I couldn't risk my job if they found out I had broken her quarantine. She became very upset and called me selfish and foolish. I went no contact with her for a while afterward, and I still feel frustrated about it. Story 4. Getting upset at others for taking precautions is unnecessary. Why do you care if a stranger wears a mask or gets vaccinated? Story 5. My mom was a chain smoker, so I would go out to get her cigarettes and tobacco at whatever smoke shop was closest. The cheapest ones were always those that said no masks allowed or mask-free zone. At one particular store adorned with Confederate flags in Pennsylvania, the cashiers were two snaggle-toothed women in their 40s, wearing crocheted face masks made of loose knit yarn with big holes, actively mocking the whole situation. A couple of weeks later, I returned to the store as the prices really were that low, and they had a big cardboard sign inside along with a glass jar that said, "Darlene is in the hospital with COVID. Please donate to cover hospital bills." The picture displayed was of one of the middle-aged snaggle-toothed women from a few weeks prior. Story 6. I delivered for a local pizza place, and we had to bag everything in trash bags. One customer reacted by saying, "I'm not your garbage man," and knocked the pizza out of my hand. When he asked what I was going to do about it, I thanked him for his $6 tip and left him with the mess. My dad was the general manager, so we blacklisted the guy from making delivery requests. He was a regular customer, so it was kind of funny seeing him come in a few weeks later for a pickup, just to send him out the door with a pizza in a trash bag again. Story 7. A man around 30 years old claimed that the virus wasn't from Wuhan and that it was all fake news. He even traveled to Wuhan and lived there for a while during the early days when transportation was still available. There was news coverage about it. Eventually, he returned from Wuhan and died due to COVID-19. To be honest, no one I know was surprised. He almost put his elderly mother at risk because of it as well. Story 8. My wife's aunt is attempting to sue the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the local clinic, and a nurse personally after her diagnosis. She believes it is her right not to have her number counted, as it made the pandemic appear worse. Story 9. COVID parties. An ex-friend hosted one that I heard about through the grapevine. He blocked me over an argument about masks. 2 people died and he was hospitalized along with others. Now he is on oxygen because his lungs are damaged and he blames the government. Story 10. Unmasked individuals approached others and pretended to cough at those wearing masks. I don't care if some people believed the masks would not help and chose not to wear them. However, intentionally harassing those who chose to wear them was absurd. There was also a viral video of a man angrily confronting someone for wearing a mask, to the point that his muscular son had to lift him and carry him out of the store. I suspect that was merely a staged act for attention. I cannot believe anyone would truly behave that way. Story 11. The individuals who claimed it wasn't real later shared their crowdfunding pages when they were hospitalized and severely ill with COVID. Story 12. The fact that so many people had to be told to wash their hands was ridiculous, and many complained about it. Story 13. As a bartender, I often had arguments with difficult adults about why we changed the layout of the tables or switched to QR code menus. Eventually, I would snap, "Do you want the governor's phone number?" It's a miracle I escaped that job without a charge. Story 14. I am a retired emergency room nurse. I worked through the pandemic. Many events occurred, making it difficult to choose one. We had patients coming in who were very ill and in denial about their illness being COVID-19. They claimed it was anything but COVID-19. The former president told them it would be over in days, and they insisted that was the case, even as they lay dying. I don't know if that can be considered immature or simply foolish. The denial was widespread. Story 15. I worked as an emergency medical technician through the pandemic. We were given a new set of protocols from the state indicating that if someone tested positive for COVID-19 and wanted to go to the hospital, they had to meet a certain set of vital signs. Otherwise, we had to inform them not to go to the emergency room and to seek medical attention at an urgent care facility or primary care provider if possible. One night, around 10 p.m., we received a call about a COVID-19 positive patient with respiratory distress. Normally, we would get a fire department response alongside us, but during the height of the pandemic, they were not called out. When we arrived at the house, a black woman walked out of the apartment to meet us on the porch. This is not unusual for family or even the patient to greet us. As we got out of the ambulance, she greeted us by saying hello, which is also common. She stood about 25 to 30 feet away and was speaking in full, clear sentences, stating that she was not in any respiratory distress. We asked what was going on, expecting her to tell us that her mother or someone inside had COVID-19 and was short of breath. She surprised us by saying that she was the one who called. She had just tested positive with an at-home test and now needed to go to the emergency room. We asked why, and she simply replied, COVID. We again asked what the issue was and why she needed an ambulance for transport to the emergency room, questioning what the life-threatening emergency was, and she reiterated COVID, this time with an attitude. Realizing she was getting agitated, we understood, looking back, that she had a right to feel frustrated. She thought she needed to go, and two strangers were questioning her. We explained to her that simply having COVID-19 wasn't a reason to go unless she was short of breath. She insisted that she was. We clarified that she wasn't in respiratory distress, which caused her to lose her temper and scream, "How do you know that? You haven't even assessed me." We tried to explain that if she was screaming across the lawn in full sentences through a mask, she likely wasn't short of breath. That's when she accused us of racism, claiming we were denying her transport solely because she was black. At that point, we called law enforcement to the scene because members of the household were coming outside to see what she was screaming about. My paramedic partner attempted to reason with her as I returned to the ambulance to retrieve the protocols for COVID-19 to help explain why we were telling her she didn't need to go to the hospital. The police arrived shortly thereafter. We explained the situation to both her and them. The woman told all of us to leave her alone and then got into her car and drove off quickly. We cleared the scene and returned to the station. A few hours later, we went to a local hospital for a transfer and discussed the incident with the emergency department staff, who started laughing because it turned out she drove to the emergency room and pulled the same stunt in the triage waiting room, accusing everyone of racism and storming out. About 20 minutes later, another hospital called our facility and asked about a black woman with COVID-19 who had left against medical advice after being refused care. She drove to the other hospital and guess what? They told her the same thing. People were dying. We were using personal protective equipment on every call and dressing with eyewear, N95 masks, and double gloves for COVID-19 related calls, while she became upset because nobody would acknowledge that she had COVID-19. She only wanted to go to the emergency room for another COVID-19 test, and that was it. In summary, a black woman accused my partner and me of being racist because we advised her not to go to the emergency room, especially by ambulance, for a second COVID-19 test. No symptoms. No life threats. She then drove herself to not one but two different emergency rooms, only to find out that they told her the same thing. Story 16. I think we have forgotten how bad it actually was during the height of the hospital crisis. I had dinner last night with a doctor who was working many shifts in the COVID-19 wards. She described calling the relatives of someone's healthy 40-year-old fathers to inform them that they had died and they could not visit because stepping into that part of the hospital without protective gear was potentially deadly. When we had no immunity, COVID-19 was devastating. I asked her what it was like when people started to get vaccinated, and she said those people stopped dying. They would still get sick, but they could stay home, watch television for a couple of weeks, and recover. Story 17. People are comparing mask mandates to Nazi Germany in my town in Ohio. Parents are holding large homemade signs in front of the local high school. The signs say things like, "This isn't Nazi Germany." This makes me think sarcastically, wow, those people endured torture, gas chambers, and mass murder. At least they weren't forced to wear masks. Story 18. A college student sitting in the New Orleans airport on March 15, 2020, was waiting for his flight to Atlanta. He was coughing deeply every minute or so and was not wearing a mask. He should have been in the hospital. The airport was crowded as everyone was being recalled home. Thankfully, my flight was an hour after his, but I still wonder how many people on his flight contracted COVID-19 just days later. Story 19. The most selfish individuals on the planet refuse to endure even the slightest inconvenience to protect the more vulnerable members of our society. Story 20. People attacking others for asking them to wear a mask. Celebrities telling us that we are all in this together while sitting in their lavish homes with staff. Story 21. A group of touring musicians finally gets the opportunity to play for their fans, refusing to vaccinate for the sake of the other people on tour and said fans, and forming their own anti-vaccine supergroup that hardly anyone cares about or pays attention to after they were dismissed. Imagine sacrificing a multimillion-dollar career and not even being able to fill a show at a small venue. Additionally, my 70-year-old stepfather loudly announced to the entire family on Thanksgiving that masks don't work because he could still smell odors. Story 22. There can only be one option for me. Near the beginning of the shutdown, 2 residents at my grandmother's assisted living home attended a social event. They brought back COVID-19, resulting in the deaths of 4 residents. My grandmother was not among those who died. Instead, she spent a month in a coma and the following months gradually recovering her faculties. Then she died. Story 23. Our local grocery store opened early for the elderly, and those indignant older men would come in and refuse to wear a mask. Story 24. I was in the process of being selected for jury duty, a large group of people in a room. One man stood up and yelled, "I will not be masked." The whole room fell silent, and the woman in charge said, "Okay, you are dismissed." It was so embarrassing for him. Story 25. There was a man who insisted that if we stopped testing for COVID-19, the whole situation would resolve itself. I can't remember his name, though. Story 26. A woman attended my children's Christmas concert in 2022 and sat behind me, coughing the whole time without a mask. When I asked her to at least cover her face while coughing, she replied, "It's not COVID, just allergies." Guess what my entire household received for Christmas that year? Story 27. There was a man running for an official position in the city of Scottsdale. He mocked George Floyd by saying, "I can't breathe," while laughing and referring to wearing a mask. The attendees also found it amusing, which was appalling. Story 28. I saw the President of the United States advising people to take harmful substances. Story 29. I remember when the pandemic first began and the public initially thought it was a lot of nonsense. A man in a tank top said, "Corona," and then licked the inside rim of a toilet bowl. He actually contracted the virus, and it put him in the hospital. Story 30. Millions of individuals complaining about wearing a mask, receiving a life-saving vaccine, and practicing social distancing to protect the lives of the vulnerable. Story 31. I work in grocery retail. The number of adults refusing to wear a mask was shocking. I escorted many people out the doors while they were yelling about their rights. Story 32. Mask fights watching people lose their minds in stores because someone was or wasn't wearing a mask. It was my biggest COVID pleasure. Story 33. I heard a man say, "I am so glad I spent yesterday in the free state of Missouri," when he was asked to wear a mask in a convenience store. The clerk and I exchanged incredulous looks. Story 34. I worked in an essential public-facing position and witnessed many adults in their 50s and 60s throwing tantrums, yelling, screaming, stomping, throwing things, and slamming doors. Their behavior was far beyond what my child displayed during the tantrum age range. Story 35. A man wearing his wife's underwear on his face while ordering at Subway. People refusing to stop going to bars for just a few minutes to help stop the spread of the virus are being irresponsible. Story 36. Fauci admitted that the mask mandates and social distancing were not backed by science. The vaccine has had peer-reviewed papers written on its side effects and lack of efficacy. All documents are available to the public, and the Fauci interviews can also be accessed. Just read and conduct some research. Story 37. In all honesty, it's probably what made a lot of people take it seriously in the United States. It was already ramping up, but Rudy Gobert, a National Basketball Association player, made a point to wipe his hands across every media microphone during a media session. 2 days later, he was the first NBA player to test positive for COVID-19, which ended up shutting down the league for a while. As soon as professional sports leagues shut down, people paid much more attention, so it worked out for the better. However, if you're told about a potentially lethal virus causing many deaths and your response is to smear germs everywhere, I don't know how you can be more immature than that without being malicious. Story 38. That small, angry dad who didn't want to wear a mask at Whole Foods farted when his son had to carry him out of the store. Story 39. I was disappointed and frustrated with older men who hassled others for wearing masks. They seemed to believe that masks are a sign of weakness and that their masculinity was threatened. However, I thought they had it backwards. The masks are just as much, if not more, to protect others from potential carriers. If you consider yourself a man, why isn't your focus on protecting others? Additionally, why would you bully people for taking steps to protect themselves? Story 40. I was looked at differently by a nurse each time I had COVID-19. The first time, I was treated as a patient and a human being, based on my clothing and being clean-shaven. However, during my homeless period when I hadn't shaved, I received blank stares and cold reactions to my pleas for help with the pain. I suppose this reflects human nature rather than immaturity. Story 41. My dad has become a raving supporter of conspiracy theories. The number of adults over 50 discovering online message boards and thinking they are uncovering the truth is astonishing, but it's just years of misleading posts and live-action role plays. It's like someone accidentally wandering into a biker bar, getting caught up in drugs and chaos for a year, and then being dropped off at their family's doorstep during the holidays. Story 42. I ended up working in a grocery store, and a bakery employee refused to serve a customer who would not wear a mask. That person returned with our store manager, who demanded that she serve him. Corporate put up the signs as mandated, but refused to enforce the policy. Fortunately, as union employees, we could not be fired for following written policies and not serving those individuals. I have strong feelings about management. Story 43. People refuse to wear masks and act smug while displaying a negative attitude toward anyone who offers a friendly reminder. Story 44. A woman, during the first days stores reopened, tried to lead a movement against wearing masks, asking, "When is it going to stop?" Story 45. It has a 99% survival rate. Why are we making such a big deal? 1% in the United States is 3.3 million people, Karen. Story 46. Resource hoarding. I understand why some things are kept secret on a much different level now. Mass panic makes me feel like I am at the zoo. Story 47. An incident occurred at a Walmart where a woman was coughing on the produce after it had been restocked. The manager had to announce over the public address system that the entire section had to be destroyed and warned that any produce in customers' carts might be contaminated. Story 48. Not so much immature, more just foolish. I saw a woman shopping in the supermarket who didn't have a mask. Instead, she had a thong covering her mouth and nose, with a pile of wet wipes stuffed in between. Story 49. People sneezed in the lift, and instead of saying, "Bless you," the man said, "Get tested." Story 50. I was working at the local grocery store and was assigned door duty. I had to ensure that people who came in were wearing masks and that we did not exceed maximum capacity. I was often told that what I was doing was illegal and that they would just drive to the nearest grocery store, which was 40 minutes away. I doubt they found anything different there. Story 51. Being restricted by politicians in what we can do, only for them to go out and have dinners without masks with their associates. Rules for them, not for us. Another instance that comes to mind is the demand for haircuts at the beginning of the lockdowns. Seeing signs that said, "We demand haircuts," was just absurd and cringeworthy. On top of that, politicians were getting haircuts while people were making scenes over that very issue. Story 52. During the lockdown, a business displayed a sign with profanity claiming that COVID-19 wasn't real. The city ordered them to take it down, and they replaced it with a censored version. That business no longer exists. Story 53. I went into a store wearing a mask as required. On my way out, someone outside, wearing their mask incorrectly, insulted me and threw their tobacco spit cup at me. Story 54. The individuals disrespectfully coughing at my immunocompromised father in Walmart because he was wearing a mask. He died of COVID-19 3 months later. Story 55. That moment when young kids were playing their band instruments through masks with holes cut over the mouth and nose completely defeated the purpose of wearing a mask. That's when I realized that pro-mask had become an ideology for some people with such an obsession that they would do blatantly foolish things to signal that they were on the right side of the issue. Story 56. My boss boasted about having a large Thanksgiving at his house in 2019, even though my coworkers and I had severe cases at the beginning. He was clearly against taking any precautions. Guess who ended up in the emergency room with half of his family testing positive? Yep, the biggest jerk I ever met. Story 57. Receiving numerous emails from every company or service I have used in the past 20 years, including Coursera, regarding their COVID protocols and messages of solidarity is overwhelming. Story 58. I work in retail and a lady came in without a mask, angry that some other customers didn't have masks. She threw a fit, believing she should be the only person not wearing one. Retail attracts some interesting characters. Story 59. While working in loss prevention at a discount store, I had a woman walk in without a mask. My manager ordered me to ask her to put one on, and she presented me with a card signed by Donald Trump stating that she was authorized to not wear a mask. Story 60. People wearing masks alone in their cars. Actual science was disregarded in favor of blind trust in science. Story 61. A man came into my store and had a tantrum about masks being required. The staff remained silent, so he pushed over a display. I still have the video of the incident, which also shows his work shirt logo. Story 62. My friend's father, who had never left the house before, wanted to demonstrate his freedom by going out in public without a mask almost every day, just to show he could. Story 63. Please stop losing your minds over having to wear a mask and then only wearing it on your chin out of spite, saying, "Well, I am wearing a mask. Wear it properly." Story 64. COVID deniers protested in front of hospitals, telling reporters, "You know you are fake news, right?" Story 65. Trump is continuously misleading the country with false statements every day, making COVID feel like a never-ending cycle. Story 66. An emergency room nurse covering shifts in the psychiatric unit wore yellow cat eye contacts because she wanted to have fun with the patients. I reported her to the nursing manager every day for 3 weeks because my roommate experienced psychosis from interacting with or even seeing her. Nurses can sometimes exhibit immaturity. Story 67. Someone I know was using a fishnet stocking as a mask while taking the train to work. The train to work? In the middle of lockdown? I hear you ask. You heard correctly. They were an essential worker in the medical field, though I could not tell you if it was directly pandemic-related. They were socially awkward and very lonely. They resorted to being edgy and contrarian on social media to get attention, which cost them most of their friend circle. Story 68. Honestly, COVID barely affected me at all. I never got sick, and I went outside to the rivers, lakes, and woods every day. I also got paid to not go to work for the first time in my life. That's when I knew something was wrong. Story 69. A public health issue became a political issue. No one should be thinking, yes, those other people. Both sides are to blame. Story 70. My father, a retired general practitioner, shocked me when I discovered he believed injecting some form of bleach would cure a virus. Not to mention how dangerous that would be. He was from the older generation and stubborn, and I couldn't convince him otherwise no matter how hard I tried. Even after the pandemic, he delved into various holistic medicine practices. I cannot speak to their effectiveness, but he eventually developed cancer. Initially, He refused to seek hospital treatment but changed his mind when his suffering became unbearable. Unfortunately, it was already advanced stage cancer and it was too late. He has passed away now. I felt the entire situation was immature from beginning to end. Story 71. A group of men in their 40s recorded a video where they entered a Lush cosmetics store at a local mall and harassed the staff for not wearing masks. The employees were young women, and you could see from their expressions that they feared for their safety. These men acted like a militia and chose the makeup store as their target. Story 72. My friend's brother scolded me for choosing not to stand in his wedding over 600 miles away in the middle of the pandemic. My roommate's father had passed away from COVID-19 weeks before. I regularly visited my grandmother and nephew during that time, so I wasn't going to take any risks. I told him to leave me alone. Story 73. I worked in a fast food restaurant during the COVID-19 pandemic, and many people were upset about being required to wear a mask to enter the premises. When news spread that individuals were being assaulted or even killed over wearing a mask, our district manager instructed us to serve those individuals first and get them out of the building as quickly as possible. Honestly, I can't believe some people lost their lives because someone couldn't handle wearing a mask for just a few minutes. If I can wear one for over 8 hours in a hot kitchen, so can they. Additionally, one of the shift managers, who no longer works there, blew his nose and went right back to work. I told him he needed to wash his hands afterward. He called me a difficult person. Well, I'm sorry, but the last thing we need is someone getting sick because of poor hygiene. It's not like we're in the middle of a pandemic or anything. Story 74. All vaccinated individuals who were unwilling to acknowledge that the vaccine did not prevent transmission after the reports were released simply stated, "I'm vaccinated," and went maskless everywhere. Story 75. The resurgence of extremist ideologies is concerning, and people seem to be disregarding scientific evidence. It is troubling to witness a rejection of science that continues to persist. Story 76. Where I live, people generally aren't as openly defiant as Americans. Instead of simply not wearing masks, you would see a number of older people wearing masks pulled down slightly to expose their noses and upper lips. Story 77. Grown adults throwing tantrums about wearing a mask in a store for 20 minutes. Because, keeping yourself and others safe is such a huge inconvenience. Story 78. The government is shutting down small businesses, but Walmarts, Targets, Lowe's, and similar stores are allowed to remain open. Story 79. Having to explain to fully grown adults that masks are for their own protection, as if they were toddlers who did not understand any better. Story 80. All the wealthy individuals and supporters of Trump complaining about everything, and I mean everything. Story 81. While driving during the pandemic, I once saw two naked women in their 50s fighting in the street. One attempted to de-escalate, but the other angrily tore off her dress with a dramatic yank, and just like that, the fight was over. This is not made up. It's real. The pandemic was a strange time. Story 82. I guess my fellow essential workers and I, along with the other 20 to 25 cars on the road, were speeding through Austin at over 100 miles per hour because we were the only vehicles and there wasn't a police officer in sight. I really miss those open roads. Story 83. I don't know if it's necessarily immature, maybe more foolish. My dad and I worked at the same job where I was a contractor. He was sent home because he reported having flu-like symptoms. I asked them, since we live together, shouldn't I be quarantined as well? They agreed, which was the responsible thing to do. Unfortunately, this happened before any legislation was passed regarding payment for time off work, so I went without pay for 2 weeks. I had enough savings to cover it, but it was frustrating. He, on the other hand, received pay for his time off. 2 days later, I went to ask him how he was feeling, but I couldn't find him. He decided he felt better, put on a nylon mask, and went to Walmart. He was symptomatic, not following guidelines, and possibly spreading the illness to others. Fortunately, he tested negative and it turned out to be allergies, but it's the principle that matters. About a year later, he actually contracted COVID-19 and got me sick with it. If it hadn't been for my aunt getting me Paxlovid, I would have ended up in the hospital because I was at the point of having to actively make myself breathe. I was fully vaccinated but have asthma. He still chose to go shopping for absolutely nothing. When I was able, I let him know how reckless and selfish he was being, especially considering that we had 2 neighbors who died because they refused vaccination and contracted the virus. Story 84. Here in Ottawa, we had a group of entitled individuals blocking the streets, harassing people, honking their horns, creating a mess, and complaining when they were forcibly removed by the police after 3 weeks. They were against lockdowns, vaccines, and our Prime Minister, among other issues. Story 85. I took a selfie holding all the toilet plungers at the hardware store and posted it with the caption, "Checkmate toilet paper users." Story 86. In college, my girlfriend at the time said she was feeling sick but didn't want to report or quarantine. As she put it, "We can get sick and quarantine together once you get it." The resulting damage to my health and academic progress was a setback that I struggled to recover from for the rest of my time in school. It was a selfish choice by her and a poor decision on my part. Story 87. When mask enforcement was in full swing, I witnessed an unmasked woman at Barnes & Noble yelling at an employee, demanding to be shown where it was written in corporate policy that masks must be worn by all customers. It was disturbing to watch. Just put on a mask. It won't harm you. You aren't exempt. Story 88. Trump's press conferences are quite an experience. If you were to reshoot those conferences exactly as they were, but with a 5-year-old playing the president, it would be almost identical. Story 89. Basically everything Make America Great Again did. Not wearing masks, refusing to quarantine, claiming it is a hoax, and restarting the anti-vaccine movement. Story 90. Someone in my friend group was dating someone from Tinder. We were all upset because you're not supposed to be out socializing, let alone meeting new people. He said, "Well, they're not strangers for long." Story 91. I think this award should go to the Derbyshire Police in the United Kingdom. When the lockdowns occurred, this specific police force decided to outperform all other police forces in the UK in how strictly they enforced the lockdowns. First, to stop people from walking in the mountains and through forests, the police acquired drones with microphones. They chased hikers with these drones while a police officer's voice came from the drone instructing them to go home. It felt like a flash forward to a future dystopia, and the hikers couldn't believe what was happening overhead. To top that stunt, the police went even further. There is a blue lagoon in Buxton, Derbyshire, with water that resembles the color of the sea in the Bahamas. People bored at home due to lockdown drove to the lagoon to get some fresh air. Unhappy with this, the Derbyshire police devised a plan to make the beauty spot unattractive in order to discourage visitors. They arrived at the Blue Lagoon with a large vat of black dye and poured it into the water. Proud of their handiwork in ruining a natural attraction, they took photos and published them on social media. Meanwhile, everyone was left thinking what a bunch of killjoys the Derbyshire police were. Story 92. Refusing to wear masks. Using ivermectin. Claiming it's a hoax. Believing that vaccines are what's harming people. Saying shine a light on people. Refusing to comply with quarantine. All of these behaviors are utterly immature and childish. Story 93. The general manager treated the managers I respected poorly and dismissed them. They brought in individuals who were not qualified and hired their friends. One manager, who often tried to be overly friendly with everyone but was ineffective in his role, shared a story about the mask mandate being lifted on a specific day. A day before that, he went to a grocery store where an employee asked him to wear a mask. Instead of complying, he created a scene about how the mandate would end the following day. Any respect I had for him vanished. A few months later, he and the director decided to reduce my pay and the pay of my coworkers. Story 94. I wouldn't say immature, but a difficult customer of sorts. After our office shut down, I wanted to make some extra cash, so I started doing food delivery. A lady ordered a bunch of groceries, and I neatly placed them on her doorstep. The thing about grocery delivery is that they need to sign for it. So, I rang her bell after putting all her items at her door, and now she wants them in front of her garage. Fine, I moved about 10 bags there, including milk, fruit juice, vegetables, etc., which wasn't all that light. I asked her to please sign it now. She wouldn't come out. I called her and she said she was scared she would get COVID from me. I assured her I was clean, but she insisted that if I signed for her, I would be committing fraud. I had to sit there while she spoke with customer service for 30 minutes, wasting time I could have spent doing more deliveries. She looked out the window and asked me to sign for her. I'm glad I'm done with that experience. Seriously, delivery people deserve much more pay. Story 95. I believe it must be the individual who informed my teenage coworker, in a somewhat threatening tone, that they could not wear a mask because they were carrying a firearm, and their carry permit required them to keep their face uncovered. In a department store. Story 96. Wealthy individuals and influencers discuss how peaceful everything is and how the world is healing, claiming they have time to find themselves and start anew. It's easy to make such statements when you're not struggling to pay bills, find work, or care for basic needs. There are many who must face the daily risk of having a family member on the front line, watching their loved ones get sick and die without the ability to visit or say goodbye due to quarantine. Story 97. It wasn't during the COVID pandemic, but shortly after Japan reopened its borders. I went there to visit family. Among all the foreign tourists I saw in Tokyo, only one family was wearing face masks, while nearly every local was. I even saw some tourists making fun of the locals. Regardless of opinions about face masks and social conformity, I found this behavior quite immature. If you can't show the basic respect of wearing a simple face mask, it's probably best to stay home. Story 98. I was in a grocery store at the height of the situation when one of the employees had a temper tantrum because we weren't all at home. "Why don't you stay home?" He was right in the middle of the toothpaste aisle, screaming at the top of his lungs. It went on for an uncomfortable amount of time. A notable moment occurred while I was walking my dog on a path near my house. I saw a gentleman coming the other way. He noticed me, stopped walking, rooted through his pocket, and put on a mask. He walked past me without stopping or interacting. I looked over my shoulder and saw him take off the mask, put it back in his pocket, and resume his walk. Story 99. People are becoming very stubborn about wearing masks. This must be one of the most childish things they have done. We have videos of adults throwing temper tantrums because someone asked them to put on a mask. Story 100. As a biologist with a decade of experience in messenger RNA platforms, where do I begin? Perhaps I will start with the way the science of medicine has become a political debate. Story 101. I worked as a cashier during COVID-19. I saw two middle-aged women nearly get into a physical fight over masks. One lady was wearing gloves but no mask, while the other was wearing a mask but no gloves. This incident occurred a day before the mask mandate came into effect. It started with the woman in gloves loudly demanding to know if we wiped down the machine after each customer. She claimed that was why she wore gloves and said everyone else not wearing gloves was foolish. The woman in the mask responded by telling her to put on a mask, with the people behind her in line agreeing. It escalated quickly, and I genuinely thought they were going to start punching each other. The situation ended with the woman in gloves storming out of the store, yelling at everyone about how foolish we were for wearing masks. Story 102. People using social distancing sticks as weapons and jabbing at those who come too close. Additionally, some individuals are yelling at customer service workers for adhering to the rules set by their employers to ensure they can continue working. Essentially, there are many people shouting at others. Story 103. Two things stand out to me from that time as the most crazy, one amusing and one disturbing. The disturbing experience was during the toilet paper and paper towel shortage. My wife worked in a grocery store, and they set aside one 12-pack for each employee on the late shift so they could get one before the shelves emptied again. She called me to come pick it up. As I walked back to the car with it, about 6 people followed me, demanding to know where I got it. I actually feared for my safety. The funny experience happened at a convenience store while I was wearing a mask. A guy who looked like he came from a rural background approached me. Of course, he was not wearing a mask, got right in my face and shouted. I wasn't even mad. It was the most absurd reaction to another person wearing a mask. Story 104. What are you afraid of? This question was asked by several individuals I refused service to because they would not wear a mask. They often posed it with a seriousness as if they were imparting great wisdom. Story 105. The people who refused to wear a mask properly or only wore face shields that were ineffective. Story 106. Healthy people acting as if they would die if they didn't get to go to Applebee's immediately. Additionally, those same individuals are so angry about it for such a long time that they have now negatively affected the entire government. That behavior is quite immature. Story 107. People's weird hatred of masks. They were not that hard to breathe in, and if they saved even one life, it was well worth it. Besides, having been a retail worker during that period, it was a blessing to have my mouth covered, so I could stop the fake customer service smile. It was much nicer. Story 108. We were walking our dog down the street when an elderly woman with blue hair stopped her car, backed up, and began yelling at us for threatening her just because we were outside without masks. It was surreal. She was so angry that I was left dumbfounded. Story 109. A woman was having a panic attack, screaming at people from her window for not being inside. She lived alone in a house and was even wearing double masks and gloves inside. Story 110. The government and the press are actively working against each other instead of collaborating for a common cause. Story 111. To me, it was people walking around without masks in grocery stores, where there were signs everywhere stating that masks were required. They seemed to be trying to provoke an argument so they could complain online about it. Story 112. My job was converted to our state's COVID helpline. Two of my favorite calls were, I saw someone spit on the ground in the park. Can I press charges? And my neighbors are using a fire pit in their yard. The COVID is going up with the smoke and spreading all over the neighborhood. Story 113. A woman came into the place where I used to work without a mask. When she was asked to wear one, she put on a masquerade ball mask, which did not cover her nose or mouth, and reacted very angrily when we asked her to leave. Story 114. People protesting to get gyms open by doing push-ups on the street are demonstrating that they can work out without a gym. Story 115. I saw people at the grocery store wearing masks made out of bug screen. Because you said I had to wear a mask, you didn't say it had to be solid. Story 116. Updates on vaccines. Story 117. When traveling to Seattle and visiting the zoo with the family for a Christmas light event, we were required to wear masks outdoors in a wide open space with hardly anyone nearby. We were also yelled at to keep the masks on in this wide open area. Seattle definitely took it to the next level compared to most cities. Story 118. I sanitized my hands and was about to eat a chip when a bully approached me and said my hands would catch fire if I ate with them still sanitized. They rushed me to the sink and made me wash my hands again with water. Story 119. My job offered time off if you contracted COVID-19, as long as you had a positive test. It would not count against your sick or vacation time. Some employees were still coming to work while sick with COVID-19. Story 120. Telling us to stand 6 feet from each other when they later admitted there was zero science to back it, and I quote Dr. Fauci, sort of just appeared. Story 121. People wearing masks in their cars alone. People wearing masks while outdoors or jogging by themselves. Story 122. A conservative friend of mine railed all year against masks and lockdowns. Once the lockdowns were lifted, she constantly posted photos of herself partying with friends. Then, in December 2020, most of her family contracted COVID-19, and some of them ended up in hospitals. She went on Facebook begging for prayers. Story 123. Affected individuals boast about going out and pretending they could smell when they actually could not. Story 124. A father was pulling his kids away from my walking path in a mall in Japan, telling them, "They have corona." Story 125. This is a little niche and incredibly specific, but Rochelle Walensky said on national television that she was scared and had an impending feeling of doom. Yes, it was bad. However, when you are a leader, these feelings should be kept to yourself. You can feel scared and even break down into a puddle of anxiety and fear in your office, and that's fine. However, You should not go on national television to hundreds of millions of viewers looking to you for strength and guidance and undermine that confidence by expressing fear. Story 126. At a restaurant, a man was blowing his nose into a napkin and leaving it for the waitress to pick up. Walking into a bar in a rural area while wearing a mask, I noticed other patrons glaring at me. During the toilet paper shortage, a woman asked the unfortunate store employee stocking the shelves what she was supposed to do to clean her car, as if it were his fault. Story 127. When I worked at Costco, I was told to stand by the Lysol wipes and ensure that customers did not take more than 2 of the 3-pack containers. A man said, "What if I kicked your ass?" when I informed him about the limit. I laughed it off, but he did not seem to share my humorous perspective on the situation. I had been working since 3 a.m., so I was indifferent to his behavior and was simply following instructions. Reflecting on it, the idea that this man might have actually caused a scene if I had pressed him further is quite astonishing. Story 128. People are refusing to wear a mask. I understand that you may not like it or may not want to, but please just follow the rules. Story 129. Some people think that wearing a mask threatens their freedom. These are the same individuals who have no issues with requirements like no shirt, no shoes, no service, driver's licenses, taking a number, standing in line, picking up their dog's waste, bathrooms assigned to specific genders, or men being asked to remove their hats at certain times. However, masks seem to be the tipping point. Story 130. I was an emergency medical technician working in Los Angeles. The level of mistrust towards science among paramedics and nurses was unbelievable. Story 131. People are getting upset about others trying to follow guidelines and health advice. Nursing homes were severely affected by COVID-19, and there were grown adults throwing tantrums about wearing masks. Story 132. People are throwing tantrums about having to wear masks, as if they were forced to wear plastic bags over their faces, which, in retrospect, might have been a good thing for some. There are claims of persecution, likening their situation to that of Jewish people in Nazi Germany, because they are not allowed inside shops and other establishments without masks. They scream about human rights violations and discrimination, calling healthcare workers modern guards and spreading false information and fake videos about vaccine-related damages. Some engage in COVID parties and protest against the vaccine. There is mass hoarding of toilet paper and canned food as if it were the apocalypse, despite there never being a shortage of essentials. Story 133. In the early days of the outbreak, when we were told to distance ourselves from others, I had to go to the mall to buy supplies. While I was waiting in line for bread, everyone, including myself, stood 6 feet apart. A woman approached and joined the line by standing next to the woman ahead of me. At first, I thought they were from the same household and were allowed to be that close. However, she just randomly decided to stand and chat with someone she had just met while waiting to buy bread. Then she had the nerve to look over her shoulder and ask me why I was standing so far back. I gave her the nastiest glare I had ever given anyone in my life. If I had said something, I would have lost my temper with her. Story 134. I saw a woman becoming distressed about wearing a mask in the emergency room. She claimed it was hindering her ability to breathe normally. A nurse approached her and said, "Ma'am, you need to calm down. There are medical professionals here who wear surgical masks for hours every day, and no one has passed out." The woman did not calm down. In fact, she became louder and more agitated, and the police were called to take her to a safe location. Another example, not of immaturity but of flawed reasoning, involved my father's side of the family, who don't believe COVID-19 is real. They visited a dine-in restaurant to socialize with their friends who are against vaccinations. There were about 30 people present, and apparently someone had COVID-19, resulting in multiple infections among the group. It became so severe that they were continually passing it back and forth. They could not visit my grandfather for about 3 months because someone was always contracting it again. They no longer believe COVID-19 is a hoax. The amount of money they lost and spent during that time was astonishing, all because they believed what they read online. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.